Okay. Oh. Hi, everybody. My name is Kathleen, and I'll be presenting my bachelor's essay, which I focused on Charleston's port expansion and environmental justice. Okay. So to provide you guys with a bit of background, why ports? According to the UN Conference on Trade and Development, 80% of global trade is carried by sea and is handled through ports. It's hard to see, sorry. There are 926 ports in the United States, which accounts for roughly 26% of the US economy. According to the South Carolina State Port Authority, the South Carolina ports handled more containers in 2021 than they have ever before. And the ports in the Low Country have a total economic impact of $7.8 billion and employ roughly 27,781 individuals. So the Port of Charleston is viewed by many as a vital part of the economic success in the state of South Carolina. So they create wealth, but not for their neighbors. So what kind of environmental impact do they have? Ports have the potential to contribute and cause a variety of negative environmental impacts. Here I've listed quite a few. Air pollution from port operations, which may include diesel exhaust, particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, and sulfur oxides, and others. The loss or degradation of wetlands, destruction of fisheries and a large species, and a contribution to noise and light pollution. And there was a link found to exposure to particulate matter causing asthma, lung disease, bronchitis, heart disease, and premature deaths. And globally, vessels produce 14% of nitrogen oxides and 5% of sulfur oxides. And these two chemicals contribute to acid rain, which is extremely harmful to soil environments. So, and not everyone is impacted equally by all of these health and physical impacts. So what is environmental justice? I included two quotes up here. One, Defining Environmental Justice by Robert Bullard, who's made a significant contribution to the literature on environmental justice. And this quote comes from, or this definition comes from his article titled Dismantling Environmental Racism in the US. And then the second quote I have up here is defining of environmental racism. And that one refers to how minority groups, neighborhoods are populated primarily by people of color and members of low socioeconomic backgrounds are burdened with disproportionate numbers of hazards, including toxic waste facilities, garbage dumps, and other sources of environmental pollution. And then environmental justice refers to the equal treatment. It's hard to see, sorry. Defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, and income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So the movement has been redefined, and environmental protection is now considered a fundamental human right in the United States. Okay, so what does this have to do with Charleston? Several studies that I found that did air monitoring of particulate matter found that PM concentrations were highest in historically Black communities, for example, in the Rosemont and Union Heights neighborhoods. And more specifically, a 2014 particulate matter assessment results found that port expansion will undoubtedly increase air pollution in low-income, primarily people of color communities adjacent to the port. And this port expansion was referring to the Hugh K. Leatherman port terminal, which opened in 2021. So there are a total of 6 ports, and half of those ports are located in North Charleston, which the demographic of North Charleston is primarily African American. It also should be noted that the environmental justice movement itself was championed by African American, Latino, Asian, and Pacific Islanders, and other indigenous groups. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I wanted to see, knowing all of this, knowing the existence and prevalence of environmental justice issues, who is talking about it? So I wanted to see if anyone was talking about it, and if not, what were they talking about? So I decided to perform a content analysis of Post and Courier articles between 2010 and 2022. So I used an online database, and the search term I used was port expansion, and that gave me quite a few articles. I think up there it says 88. However, over half of those were repeated uploads, so that meant like the same article would be uploaded but with a different title or maybe the day after. So I ignored that and just used one of the 2 or 3 same articles. And so this gave me 35, or my sample study was 35 articles, sorry. Okay, so I completed a qualitative thematic analysis and used an iterative approach when developing my coding scheme. So I ended up creating 4 thematic categories: socioeconomic issues, which that would include port expansion being talked about relative to businesses, the economy, or politics; environmental justice, so was environmental justice specifically that phrase used in the articles; physical environment, so the port expansion being talked about relative to air pollution and noise pollution, any environmental impacts that are not social; and other, meaning that port expansion was just talked about simply in passing along with something else, but it just happened to come up in that article. And like I said, my study sample ended up consisting of 35 articles. So, and these are some examples of the of quotes that I used to categorize the articles in these categories. So for socioeconomic, this specific part is a quote by Nikki Haley. And so she's just talking about port expansion and its importance to the vitality of the economy, and basically saying that she wants to do anything we can. And then environmental justice, it says environmental justice specifically, and talking about increased attention to environmental justice issues. So there's that. And then physical environment, this one is talking about environmental and traffic-related consequences due to the expansion of the Leatherman terminal. And then other, as you can see, it's just kind of used in a listing talking about current infrastructure changes in South Carolina. So what I found, so only 2 out of the 35 articles even mention environmental justice. The one I just showed you was from 2020, and then another article in 2016. So majority fell into the category of socioeconomic. So most of them talked about port expansion in terms of the economy and how vital it is to the economy of South Carolina, and more importantly, Charleston. And so this showed me that environmental justice is largely ignored in the conversation of port expansion. Okay, so implications and conclusions. There's clearly a gap between what is happening and what is in the dialogue in the media, particularly by the Post and Courier. And ports are huge sources of wealth, but at the expense of the health and well-being of primarily non-white residents. And I did find in other research that environmental justice was being talked about related to infrastructure changes. So I found an article talking about construction of I-26 that cut through the Rosemont community, and that construction was to try and make it easier to have an access road for trucks to get straight to the port. So it was it wasn't directly talking about port expansion, but it was an indirect part of the port expansion. So my research contributes to the literature of environmental justice and adds to this discussion. And from my research, I found that further research needs to be done on why people live near busy ports, the history of redlining, or the history of racial gerrymandering. So yeah, and also I'm realizing I forgot to talk about Post and Courier, or why I chose that. It's the oldest newspaper in South Carolina, as well as one of the most circulated in the state. And so I found that it was the best one when I wanted to look at local media, that the Post and Courier would be the best option. So yeah, and that's it.